Bob Stutz is recognized globally as one of the leading experts on CRM, customer relationship management, and he brings more than 20 years of business applications development experience to Salesforce. As CEO of Marketing Cloud and Chief Analytics Officer, Bob is responsible for driving all aspects of the company's Marketing Cloud and Analytics Cloud business, including product strategy, management, marketing, engineering, and distribution. Bob joined Salesforce in 2016, leaving his corporate vice president position with Microsoft Dynamics. Before that, he spent 17 years in executive positions at Hewlett-Packard, SAP, Siebel Systems, and Sybase. Prior to his enterprise software career, Bob had a 22-year distinguished career in the United States Army. He holds a bachelor's degree in Government Eastern European Studies from the University of Maryland and a master's degree in Human Resources Organization Development from Chapman University. Salesforce is a cloud-based software company headquartered in San Francisco, California, with their second largest location right here in Indianapolis. They currently employ 1,700 people in Indianapolis and will be adding 800 more employees locally by 2021. Salesforce is a worldwide tech leader best known for its cloud-based customer relationship management software that allows customers to maximize sales by storing data, monitoring leads, gaining insights through analytics, as well as delivering quotes, contracts, and invoices. At Salesforce, they believe in a higher purpose for tech and annually donate 1% of revenue and 1% of software to nonprofits, plus 1% of employee time is donated to volunteer causes. This 1-1-1 philanthropic commitment has been in effect since 1999. Please join me in welcoming Bob Stutz.
Thank you very much. All right. So let me just start off with, I'm really surprised people paid money to come here to hear me talk. I usually don't public speak. Years ago, I decided that I really didn't like it, so I've always tried to stay in the background. And the joke among people that work for me is I'll commit to an engagement to publicly speak, but one of them knows that they will actually be the one going to have to speak. And they're over there laughing. Actually, they all came today to make sure I didn't back out. I was sort of guilted into doing this presentation. Which doesn't happen very often for people who know me. But you know, I sort of felt guilty. I've been in Indianapolis for 2.5 years, and I keep hearing all the time people say, we don't even know who you are. And so it all started with the IBJ, and IBJ said, oh, we want to do an article about Salesforce, and I said, okay, fine. And then the article didn't end up about Salesforce, it actually ended up about me. And then I was really like, the cat was out of the bag, and now I have to actually talk. What's always interesting, though, is, you know, Salesforce is this big company, and I think you did an amazing job talking about we're a company, we're unlike other tech companies. We have a social conscience, and we really do believe that technology and social justice, social cause all goes hand in hand. I don't know if those of you that are following what's happening in Davos, but my boss just went out yesterday and made this big public thing about the fact that access to machine learning and artificial intelligence should be every person's human right. And he's absolutely right. But I don't want to talk about that, because that's a whole nother topic. So normally, you know, when we speak, we usually have to give this whole corporate pitch. You know, my PR people, they called like 20 times over the last 2 weeks because they always worry when I'm going to speak. I've had this little problem ever since I was young about I don't like people to tell me what to do. And I'll talk a little bit later about that. But I did want to talk a little bit about Salesforce. Because we are a different company, we have this 1-1-1 model, and you know, we do fight a lot for social causes. And you know, how we came to Indianapolis is we acquired a company called ExactTarget about over 5 years ago, which was a great company. But I also want to talk about we're not. All right, so that gives you a little insight to my personality. And you know, the problem is somebody probably purposely did that. Just, you know, every time I'm in an offsite with my boss, somebody does that on purpose, just so that they can get the point across. So we are this company that is different, and we acquired ExactTarget, but we're very different from when we acquired ExactTarget. We are Salesforce, we're not ExactTarget. We've grown this pretty tremendously here in Indianapolis. I came here 2.5 years ago. My boss said, first of all, he convinced me to leave Microsoft, which I was really happy at Microsoft. He says, oh, come to San Francisco. I got something for you to fix. And I said, fine. I was in San Francisco 5 months, 4 months. And then he said, look, you did such a great job fixing this. Could you go fix one more thing for me? I said, okay, fine. I'll do whatever you want me to do for another year or so. Well, that was 2.5 years ago, and he didn't tell me that I was going to have to move to Indianapolis to do it. And I have to say I moved to Indianapolis, and I absolutely love it here. My wife and I both like it here. But the thing I want to talk about is, you know, ExactTarget was a great company, but we've expanded way beyond that. You know, in 2015, you know, I run this business called Marketing Cloud. We were at about $505 million in revenue. We had issues. 2016, I was asked to come out here and figure out what to do. Since then, we will finish our fiscal year in about 2 weeks. And our projection right now is my business will be at about $1.8 billion. Which means we've had unbelievable growth over the last couple years. And it's really because we've harnessed the power in Indianapolis. We continue to grow here. We're over 1,900 employees and continuing to grow. We are the largest tech employer in the state and continue to grow. And we're different than ExactTarget. Because I always hear, oh, you're ExactTarget. No, we're not ExactTarget, we're Salesforce. We have a very good culture, but by the way, that's what my PR people said. I had to say all those nice things. So I'm going to stop there with that. So now you know, we're Salesforce. Anybody not know Salesforce? Anybody not see the ads? My boss loves to send Twitter stuff all the time, you know. Anybody follow Mark on Twitter? You really should, because he's quite an interesting guy, and he's very informative. It's been the highlight of my career working for Mark. But that's not what I want to talk about. Okay, now I'm going to throw away all the cards they gave me to say. What I really want to talk about is, I want to tell you a little bit about me. How I ended up in the software business, because it was totally by accident. It had never been in a million years that I had ever thought I would do this. From the time I was a child, I was pretty rebellious. I know this is going to sound bad, but I used to tell my parents all the time that I was born into the wrong family, because I really didn't have anything in common with the rest of my family. I still don't have anything in common with the rest of my family. I have one brother who's left, and you know, him and I get along really well, but he was like 5 years old when I left home. From the time I was a child, I was always getting in trouble. When I was 13, I got thrown out of Boy Scouts. I wasn't just thrown out, I was expelled and asked never to come back because I couldn't follow the rules. On my 16th birthday, I dropped out of high school. And then I decided to drop out of high school, and I decided to take a joyride around the country and sort of experience life in a very different way. And then close to my 17th birthday, I decided that, you know, maybe it was time to like do something productive with my life. And on my 17th birthday, I was on a bus going to Fort Dix, New Jersey, where I proceeded to spend 22 years in the Army. And I know my whole family used to say, thank goodness, it'll teach him discipline. But I learned really quickly in the Army that you could still be rebellious and still play by their rules. So it was sort of an interesting experience for me. 22 years, of which I spent almost no time stationed in the United States. I spent a lot of time in Europe, Africa, and other strange parts of the world. And it was an interesting experience because it taught me a lot. The most important thing I think I learned in the military was about mentorship. Because I had a general who said to me one day, he said, "You really don't like to be managed at all, do you?" And I said, "No, I don't." "You really don't like authority, do you?" "No, I have this problem with authority. It's been trouble of my whole life." He said, "That's great, but you need to harness it in the right way." And he mentored me. And that's why mentorship is really important. You know, there are no bad employees. There are just bad managers and bad leaders at the end of the day. And I really learned that at an early age, which was, if you have a good mentor, you can push somebody in the right direction, but you never want people to lose themselves in that. You always want them to be individuals. That's important. So in the software business, well, let me just finish the story really quick. 22 years, I thought I would stay 30 years. Unfortunately, I got injured, and that was the end of my military career. One day I woke up, and they said, "Guess what? You're not deployable anymore, and by the way, you've got to retire." So I retired. And then I thought to myself, oh man, what the hell am I going to do? So I had a year where all of a sudden I said, well, look, I need a job for a year until I retire. And they said, great, you're going to work on this high-tech stuff. And I said, great. I don't know a whole lot about high-tech, but I'll try it. And it was really interesting, and I taught myself to code. I taught myself how to do all these things. I got involved in a project that was called the Talking Head Project at the time, where the military was doing experiments with teaching people how to speak foreign languages. And I met all these great people from companies like Oracle and Sybase and SAP, and they said, look, there's an easier way to make a living. I said, fine, I'm all in. So I went to work in high tech. However, I did not work in tech. I actually had to take a job as a recruiter in a tech company. Because every military person knows how to recruit people. It's one trait you learn really well. Because that's what you do all the time, is you have to recruit. And so I ended up as a recruiter. That didn't last long, by the way, because I ended up supporting this person who basically, I was in a meeting one day and I started to say some stuff, and they looked at me and said, well, you're in the wrong job. I said, great, I'm willing to do. And she said, well, I have another job for you. So then all of a sudden, I found myself as a director of engineering, which was really interesting. I went from recruiter to director of engineering overnight. And now I come back to the mentor thing, because this person believed in me, even though I have to say, I'm not the easiest person in the world to get along with. But I've always had these people throughout my career who believed in me, who saw the talent in me, and they tried to harness it. So that person spent a lot of time teaching me the high-tech business. She's actually here today because she actually works for me now. However, the joke is I still work for her. So Glenda, could you stand up a minute? Glenda is one of the most, I have to say, in the high-tech business, one of the most accomplished people. And, you know, she was an early mentor of mine, continued to mentor me through all these years. We worked together. After Sybase, we went off and we did this startup together, and then we went different ways. I went into the big corporate world, she went into the startup world. And now she works for me. Only because I asked her to come out of retirement, move from Breckenridge, Colorado, and come work for me for 2 years. But that's what happens when you have mentors and people that you meet over time who really believe in you, and you know, you build these relationships, especially in the high tech. So, long story short, I got into this high-tech business, but then it wasn't long before I developed this really bad reputation as the bad boy of the software world. And all of a sudden it was, people only called me when they were in trouble, which was sort of nice actually, because you can go in with this whole set of things where you say, okay, look, if you're going to hire me, it's on my conditions, which is you have to let me do what I do best. Leave me the hell alone. Don't talk to me. And when I have $1 billion business for you, I'm leaving. And that's been the story of my career, actually, to be quite honest. But along the way, I learned some really important things, which was people are the most important thing in this business. Growing people, nurturing people, teaching them how to stand on their own 2 feet and not be robots in a company. That is really important. You have to have a voice. You have to learn to speak up. You have to learn to take the risk. It always amazes me when I go to companies and I see people who are really unhappy. And you know that they know the right thing to say, but they never want to say it because they're scared. You have to encourage people to be themselves and speak up and not be afraid of what comes out of their mouths at the end of the day. I only hire people who will argue with me, who will fight with me, who will tell me I'm wrong, because that's an important piece at the end of the day. I know I'm probably rambling on, but that's just the way it is. This is what you get $35 for lunch for, okay? Take it or leave it. But it's an important piece. I'm sure, how many of you are managers in the audience? How many of you manage people? How many have been managing people for 5 years? 10 years? 20 years? 30 years? 40 years? There are a few people older than me. That's really good. But managing people, especially in this day and age, how many of you have people right out of college? It's tough, isn't it? Millennials are a whole nother world. I have a daughter who's about to graduate from college, and unfortunately, she's acquired some of my bad traits, like not respecting authority, always talking back, just a few things like that. Smart as can be, but millennials are really hard to deal with because they think differently, they act differently, their expectations are different. I work in a world where I'm one of the oldest people, and that's no lie. Most people in the high-tech business are in their usually early 20s to late 20s. Even managers in a lot of places are really young. And it always amazes me because this new generation of people, they're really bright, but you have to learn how to manage them differently. You have to help them grow. It's not like the old days where you tell somebody what to do and you go out there and you just, you say, do as I tell you to do, and that's it. How many of you believe in innovation? How many of you really know what innovation is? Anybody? Anybody want to take a stab at what innovation is? I'll make it simple for you. I won't put you on the spot. Actually, maybe I'll walk around and put somebody on the spot. No, I won't do that. Innovation is about creativity. And innovation in this day and age, how many of you work in companies that have an innovation program? Anybody? Isn't it amazing that there's an innovation program? It's like you can command people to be innovative and it just happens. Sorry, doesn't work like that. How you get innovation is growing people who are rebellious, who think differently, who aren't afraid to think out of the box, who aren't afraid to go against the system. That is how you get true innovation at the end of the day. You can't innovate a program. You can't say, I've got an innovation program, and by the way, out of that innovation program, man, I'm going to get all these great ideas, and people are just going to drop what they're doing. Does not happen. I've seen it time and time again. The only way to get innovation is through creativity. And that creativity comes from fostering it with people. Young, old, doesn't matter. But you have to let people be creative. You have to let them be themselves. Think differently, speak differently. How many of you are lawyers? A few. Okay, I won't tell any lawyer jokes. How many of you are bankers? How many of you are in education? Oh, my banker's back there, and I can't say anything bad about him. How many of you are in education? Oh, quite a few. How many of you teach university level, college level? Quite a few. So it really starts there. I always have this thing about, like, when I'm recruiting kids out of college, it always amazes me that, like, they come to a job interview and they're like robots. It's like people have prepared them to say this, and this. And right away, it doesn't take me more than 5 minutes. I just say, fine, thank you. I'm not interested. My advice to educators, teach people to be different. Teach them to speak their piece. How many of you teach in a business college? Be careful about what I say then. You know, there's a lot of good things that are taught in universities. I actually went to university. It took me 10 years to get my bachelor's degree because I was deployed all the time. And then the only reason I got a master's degree was because I was laid up and I was sort of crippled for a while and I couldn't do anything else, so I thought I might as well get my master's degree. But what I learned is that business is very different than what you learn in school. How you conduct business, how you grow a business, you know, it is very, very different. And I have a very different philosophy about it, which is, and I have to say, you know, there's a lot of people who say, oh yeah, you've had all this great success. I don't look at it like that. I've never been successful in my life. My teams have been successful, not me. I'm just sort of like the orchestrator, you know. I'm the guy that's sort of like, you know, I try to be the coach. Now every once in a while I lose my temper and I have to be the disciplinarian, but I don't look at it as success for me. Success for me is always about team, and team is very important. And it's something that's not taught enough. Because I always find people and leaders and managers who, it's always about them. I. Never we. People who come to work for me that say I, they actually don't last very long. Because it's never about I, it's never about me, it's about we, collectively. Business is about a team. It's a team sport. It's like basketball. You have to learn to play together as a team. And that is really critical. And I know I'm rambling on again. Sorry, that's what you get for $35. But I really want people to understand that in this day and age, innovation, creativity, how you manage people, it's got to be different. The old ways don't work anymore. Millennials don't work in those environments. It's very hard for them to adapt to that. You know, we've created a generation of kids who aren't afraid to question authority, who aren't afraid to ask questions. When I was growing up and I was in school, teachers used to say to me, can you just shut up and listen? Because I always used to ask questions. Because I always thought, like, look, I want to know why. Why? I don't care what it says in the book. I want to know why. And nowadays we have whole generations. They want to know why. Why do they have to do this? How many of you have employees that always ask, why do I have to do this? Yeah, it's pretty common nowadays. 10 years ago, you didn't have that. People would come to work and they just do what they did, and if you told them to do something, they do it, and that was pretty much it. Nowadays, people want to know why. How many of you have kids? How many of your kids are incessant about, well, why? Why is that? How come is that? Well, but I still don't understand. Why? That's the generation we have nowadays. And by the way, at work, you have to learn how to deal with that. You have to learn how to embrace it. Not fight it, but embrace it at the end of the day. And that's when you get successful teams, is when you get people, you embrace the differences, and you get them to talk with each other. You get them to work with each other. And ask each other questions, and not be afraid of it at the end of the day. How many in this room consider yourself to be rebellious at work? Oh, that's good. A couple. It's more than I had expected. I take pride in being rebellious. My boss always says to me constantly, "You don't like to be managed, do you?" And I always say, "No, I don't. You knew that when you hired me." In this business and in this world today, it's good to be different. It's good to ask questions. It's good to be curious about what's happening. And it's also good to have a social conscience, no matter what industry that you're in. Because the world needs people who are going to speak up about social injustice. And now I'll come back to Salesforce and why it's such an important company. Because we've tended to take all these values, letting people be themselves, letting people speak up, letting our employees have a say, even when it means questioning the core fundamentals of our company. And it has been something that we pride ourselves on at the end of the day. And I think, some of you may have seen, we've had a few incidents where people questioned, why do we do business with certain companies? It is part of our core culture to question, to say things. We have this thing called chatter. Anybody know what chatter is? Yes. How many of you are actually Salesforce customers? Quite a few, right? Yeah, good. So we have our own chatter. We let employees complain about anything they want at the end of the day. And it's always interesting. Okay, you have to throw out some of the stuff like, okay, how come we don't have a chef? How come we don't have a cafeteria? It's the younger generation today. But a lot of times it's about things like, why are we not doing this? And we let people do that openly. And it's actually a good thing at the end of the day. How many of you let your employees or people you work with complain openly? And not a whole lot. It's tough. It takes a special way to deal with that. But that is part of our culture at Salesforce. It's always been my culture. I actually encourage people to rebel. I think it's the best thing. I have one firm rule, which most people that know me really well, is that every rule was made to be broken or bent at the end of the day. And for me, that has been the story of my life, which is I don't want to be sort of forced into some box. I like being outside the box. I like being different. I like being unpredictable. And I would encourage all of you to do that. Because at the end of the day, that's what makes us all different. That's what makes us sort of pretty amazing people. We're all individuals. And to be an individual means you have to have your own thoughts. You have to have your own thinking. Do I have any more time? Whew. Am I good? 3 more minutes. God. You really want to get that $35 worth, huh? All right, now I lost my train of thought. That's unusual. However, back to the social conscience thing. How many of you here in Indianapolis, how many of you live in downtown Indianapolis? How many of you have noticed how bad the homeless problem has gotten in downtown Indianapolis over the last 12 months? It is a crisis. And I would ask every one of you to really start pushing that crisis. How many of you are aware of the crisis that exists in San Francisco today because of the homeless? It's unbelievable. Mark Benioff is an advocate for, no person should have to live on a street. No person should have to be homeless at the end of the day, especially in our country. But in Indianapolis, what has really surprised me over the last year is how bad the homeless problem has gotten. And my call to each and every one of you is do something about it. donate, talk to the mayor, talk to the governor, talk to your representatives, talk to the city council, because it is a problem that is growing out of proportion for a city the size of Indianapolis. The latest statistics show that there was, like, I think over 4,000 homeless people in the city of Indianapolis. That is a lot of people, considering that San Francisco has about 7,800 homeless people. So if you really think about that, what that does to a business community, what it does to your city. Indianapolis has prided itself on its image, its sports, bringing all these different sports into the city. And that's an important piece, but it's not the image you want people to walk away from at the end of the day. That it's a city that can't take care of its people. It's a city that can't even figure out how to help the homeless. You know, I was doing some research on this, and it's like, there's no one person in Indianapolis who wakes up every morning and says, it is my job to solve the homeless problem in Indianapolis. And one rule I've always learned, if you're going to solve problems, you need one person who wakes up every single morning and says, it is my job to solve that problem. And in Indianapolis, we don't have it. And I think, you know, that's why my call to you would be to get out there and really put pressure on the government, on the city, on corporations to really figure out how this problem is going to get solved, because it's not a good problem. And you know, it's really sad when you walk out and it's, you know, 17 degrees and you walk into Monument Circle and you see all the homeless people there. A lot of people don't see it because they don't live downtown. I live downtown. I see it every day. And the fact that we have people living out in the cold, in this weather, and it's not getting better but only worse, is my one call for all of you to develop a social conscience and figure out how to solve this problem, because it is a bad problem. And it is just not right that there are so many people living on the street and people who are going hungry. Indianapolis is a great city, it's a great place, but it can be so much better. And that's where I would ask all of you to really develop that social conscience, because it is important. That's the only way problems get solved at the end of the day. Anyways, I think she's telling me it's time. Good.
Well, thank you for that not rambling, very interesting set of comments. Really appreciate that. I have to say, most of the guest speakers up here wear a suit, and hearing now your conversation about being a rebel and encouraging people to rebel, I kind of get the Trailblazer sweatshirt, and I notice there's a whole table of people over there also wearing the sweatshirt. So is there a story behind Trailblazer?
Well, it's just, you know, it's something that we sort of stand for, which is, you know, we encourage people to blaze their own trails. Right, to change their life, do things differently. You know, we've been really successful. We have this program called Trailhead, and it's been very successful. We've been able to get people who have been laid off from other jobs to learn Salesforce and become Salesforce administrators, Salesforce coders, working in high tech who worked in factories before, right? And so the Trailblazer thing is all about that, right? Is really getting people to blaze their own trail at the end of the day.
Great. Well, I'm going to jump around with some of the things that you talked about that I think would be interesting for our audience to hear about. You briefly mentioned that your boss is in Davos talking about artificial intelligence, but you weren't going to talk about it. I hope you can at least give us some of your thoughts on AI, since everyone likes to talk about that, and there's kind of the debate of, is AI going to eradicate jobs and increase unemployment, or is it actually going to create a whole new set of opportunities that we can't even conceive of today? So what are your thoughts on AI and what that is doing to our economy and likely to do to our economy, and how that might impact us here in Indy?
I think, you know, AI is, in machine learning in general, is changing the world, right? I mean, if you look across lots of different industries, like what always amazes me, like, you know, if you even think about like construction industry, like these big machines that you know, build roads and they do all this amazing stuff, those machines used to have a human driving them who really controlled the machine. In this day and age, I was really amazed to see these new machines that are computers. And by the way, they have to hire a different breed of person to actually do that stuff, because it has to be somebody who's more technically inclined, who has, and I think, you know, AI is not going away. AI is just going to keep growing. I think if you look at, just last night I saw this thing about this restaurant, that the entire restaurant, except for the people who put the food on the table, it's robots. They have figured out a way to build an entire restaurant that is done, cooked. The ingredients are all measured by robotics, and it's all thrown in a wok. It's all, you know, and then the wok flips over into a bowl, and then somebody comes and grabs the bowl and puts it on your table. But there's not a single person in the kitchen. Not a single one. But now they need people to, like, help those machines. Mm-hmm. You have to have people to program the machines. You have to have people to maintain those machines, right? So it's not that jobs will go away, it's that jobs will change, mm-hmm. right? Which has been the case throughout our history, sure. right? We are in this fourth industrial revolution, and in that revolution, it is a different world, right? Mm-hmm. The world has become very technical. The world has changed. Machines do a lot of things today. How many of you work in manufacturing? Manufacturers know better than anybody. How many jobs do you see get replaced by robots at the end of the day? It doesn't mean that jobs go away. It means the jobs have to change at the end of the day. Mm-hmm. And I think the key thing is education, you know, and I have these discussions all the time with people in the government, which is, it's not about, you know, you have to teach people that this movement is coming. It's not going away. And we have to prepare people for it. People that work in factories today, people that work in all jobs have to have the ability to have that training available to them so that they can do stuff differently, mm-hmm. right? Because it's not that jobs are going away, jobs will just be different.
We have a question from the audience.
I thought somebody wanted their money back.
No. Sorry, no refunds. And actually this ties into the talk about rebelliousness, which is in Indiana we like to be nice, and we don't necessarily like to raise a stink and criticize. So how would you recommend that as a state where we have that kind of culture, we can actually encourage and foster more rebellion and innovation? And
I will say that has been one of my key things that I talk about all the time, is like, people in Indiana are just too nice. And there's nothing wrong with that. But, you know, Indianapolis is an amazing city. I have to say, it is truly an amazing city. I've lived all over the world, and I love Indianapolis. I really like it here. And I think the one thing that frustrates me constantly is that Indianapolis doesn't talk about what a great city it is. Like, you go across, like, I mean, I had only been to Indianapolis once before, which was actually in the 80s when I was in the military. I had to come here for a military board. I was here for like 1-2 days. All I remember is I got in, it was like late in the afternoon, and I said, at Fort Ben Harrison, I said, look, I'm gonna go downtown and grab a beer, and they said, no, you're not, it's off limits. I said, why is it off limits? Because it's not a nice place. You don't want to go downtown, right? But that's changed. Indianapolis is an amazing city. If you look at the urbanization that's happened downtown, it's pretty amazing. Mm-hmm. But nobody talks about it. Nobody. It is always frustrating. Like, we have a hard time recruiting senior people to come to Indianapolis. I'll just be honest. Young talent, not a problem. Senior, mid-level talent, huge problem. First question, where's Indianapolis? Second is usually, oh, the Midwest. Who wants to live there? But part of it is because, you know, years ago I was in Austin, Texas, and I had moved from Austin from Silicon Valley, and at that time, you know, George Bush was the governor, and you know, him and Rick Perry, who was the lieutenant governor at the time, they really went on this tear in the 90s to talk about why high-tech companies should come to Texas. I mean, they were so bold as to go out and put freaking billboards on 101 in Silicon Valley that said, come to Austin, and there was this beautiful thing, price of housing, low cost, family environment. You know, they put television commercials on you know, all the stations in the Bay Area. And by the way, the migration happened. Today, Austin is the Silicon Valley of the Southwest at the end of the day. But they were very brash about telling the story of Texas and why would you want to come to Texas? Why would you want to move to Austin? And my frustration with Indianapolis and Indiana is that people are too nice. They don't want to tell that story. And I think it's time that stop being nice and start telling the story, because Indianapolis and Indiana have a lot to offer people. And I think the rest of the world, the rest of the United States, doesn't understand that at the end of the day.
Well, their IBJ column on you last month, you said a lot of nice things about Indianapolis in the vein of what you were just saying. But as you pointed out, economic development is very competitive. So Austin puts billboards in San Francisco, and by the way, we compete with Austin and Nashville and all these other cities around the country and globally to get the best talent here. So as you think about growth opportunities, Salesforce is going to add 800 more people by 2021, some of the challenges you just mentioned. Are there other things besides tooting our own horn that we should be doing to make it a more attractive place for tech and other talent to come to Indiana?
So I have one real pet peeve that I always talk about. Is why the hell, when you move to Indiana, do you have to take a driving test again? Can someone explain that to me? Like, why is Indiana the only state that doesn't have a reciprocal agreement with every other state? Like, are you special? Is it like its own country at the end of the day? And by the way, you may think, okay, that's a real petty thing. I will tell you, we have had people turn us down for jobs because if you think about the tech business, a lot of people come from India, they come from China, they come from Eastern Europe to the United States to take tech jobs. They go through a lot of pain because most of them didn't have driver's license in their country. They have to go to driving school, they have to suffer through, and literally, because I know I've helped many people get through this, they suffered just getting that first license. And then we recruit these like mid-level, senior-level people, and we say, hey, look, come, it's a great place. We bring them here. Oh, they love it. And then they start asking the questions, like, okay, well, what about driver's license? And then you say, you have to take a test. What? Yes, you have to take a test. And I can tell you, that is like a non-starter for a lot of people. In this day and age, in the country we live in, why is Indiana the only state where there's not reciprocality? Sorry, I don't understand that. And you know, I've said it to the governor, I've said it to quite a few legislators that I think it's ridiculous that in this day and age, why you can't move from state to state and just hand them your old license and get a new license. It's sort of ridiculous. You may think it's a minor thing, but think about this person who immigrated to the United States, who has been in the US for quite a while. They've lived in the same state, whether it's Washington, whether it's Texas, whether it's California. Then they come to Indiana and they find out they have to, like, you know, take a driving test. It's painful. It really is.
Well, okay, billboards to advertise ourselves, and let's get rid of the driver's license test. Got it, okay. Well, I'm going to ask my last question, and then we're going to wrap up. You gave some you gave some advice during your talk about what a good leader or a manager should do about mentorship and encouraging people to break the rules and rebel and teach people to be different. What are your last words of wisdom for this room of existing and emerging leaders? How do we take Indianapolis and our state to the next level?
You have to always be different and figure out how do you encourage that in people at the end of the day. How do you encourage people to be different? How do you encourage students to be different? How do you encourage your employees to be different? And, you know, because it is an important thing at the end of the day. And I think, you know, and you specifically mentioned Indiana, and I think people in Indiana are just too nice sometimes, afraid to speak out, afraid to, you know, and I think part of that is because of what they've been taught over the years, right? It's great to be polite. You should always be polite. I'm actually a very polite person, 90% of the time. But being polite is great. but you also have to have a rebellious spirit. You have to speak up, right? How many of you, and I promised I wouldn't say this because it just eats at me, how many of you are aware of the hate crimes bill in Indiana? Very important bill, by the way. You want to talk about another thing that prevents companies from moving to Indiana? Not having a hate crimes bill is one of those things. Last year, the lovely Indianapolis House was going to pass a bill that struck transgender language out of the hate crimes bill, which is ridiculous. In this day and age, sorry, we live in a different world today. Embrace it. That's every company in this country today has to embrace the fact that transgender is part of our society. It's part of our lives, and there's nothing wrong with it. But in Indiana, they still wanted to strike it out of the language, which is why the hate crimes bill didn't get passed. And I was a very vocal advocate about this. You cannot have a hate crimes bill that takes that out. That is not a hate crimes bill. You need a hate crimes bill that is inclusive of all people at the end of the day. And I would say, you know, the governor, he's done a great job. He's pushing it forward. But I would say he needs everybody's help to get this done. And by the way, it is something, as we go more into the future of business in Indiana, it will be a blocker for companies moving to Indiana if we do not have a hate crimes bill that protects every single person. So my ask is, get out there, advocate for it, push your representatives for it. Because, by the way, it hurts the state, ultimately, at the end of the day. And as a person who runs a pretty large business here in Indiana, I can tell you that every day I deal with this because I worry that we're going to pass a hate crimes bill. How many of you were here when now Vice President Pence did the amazing thing with the other bill that was passed? I don't think Indiana wants another black mark like that. And we shouldn't, because it's a great state. We have great people. And it's time for people to understand that, look, you have to have inclusivity. And you can't avoid it at the end of the day. And as a state, it's important for the business climate, for the education climate, to have that in place. And I'll get off my soapbox now.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for everything you're doing at Salesforce, for the company, for our economy, and the community. And thank you for being a rebel. Thanks for being with us today. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks. Appreciate it.